How did Vietnam become split into two by 1954? This is a short presentation explaining an important context behind the origins of the Vietnam War. The first thing to be aware of is that for many years Vietnam was a French colony, since 1887. It was part of an area known as French Indochina, and this included what we now know as Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. From the map on the right, Vietnam is the pink area, Laos is the orange and Cambodia is the yellow. All of these make up the same space that can be seen occupied by French Indochina on the left-hand map. Unsurprisingly, French rule wasn't very popular, but what could the Vietnamese people do? They were oppressed. However, World War II happened, and this inspired Vietnam to fight for its independence. Of course, Hitler was in Europe, and the French, being allies, couldn't just let this go. They started to panic. They therefore had to go and find out what was happening in their own country, so they largely left Indochina. Of course, this left Vietnam and those surrounding countries very vulnerable and open to attack, and this came in the form of Japan. Japan had taken opportunity to invade North Vietnam. It had already been successful invading China and decided to expand its territory further. Of course, people in Vietnam weren't going to stand for this. They'd been occupied by French for such a long time, now occupied by Japan. Could they not just become their own country? So some people started to want to be inspired to overthrow both French and Japanese. And opposition groups were formed. In particular, a rebel group called the Viet Minh was set up by two leading communists, Ho Chi Minh and Nguyen Vo Giap, who incidentally was a history teacher, so don't say we're not dangerous, who lived in southern China. The reason why they lived in southern China and not Vietnam was because it was basically safer for them to formulate a rebel group outside of the country and then to attack the occupants rather than doing it from the inside out. So the Viet Minh fought really hard, and with the end of World War II and the defeat of the Japanese, the Viet Minh managed to establish their own independent Republic of Vietnam. However, the French soon returned to the south of Vietnam, where support was stronger, and they pushed the Viet Minh into the jungles of the north. So victory for Ho Chi Minh was very brief indeed. And in fact, 5 years of fighting between the north and the south of Vietnam ensued between 1946 and 1954. The conflict grew in size as other, more powerful countries started to become interested. China, who became communist in 1949, started to support the Viet Minh in the north and give artillery to the fighters. In the south, the capitalist USA started getting interested in helping the French. The USA had recently switched to a policy called containment, where they promised the world to prevent countries turning communist. What better place to start than a conflict which was just that? Capitalism versus communism. Finally, the conflict drew to a close with a big battle called Dien Bien Phu between the Viet Minh and the French, which led to the French surrender, and the French soon agreed to leave Indochina for good. Of course, a lasting peace had to be brought about, and in order to do so, a big agreement called the Geneva Agreement was signed by several countries in 1954, and this split Vietnam into two, as the image shows on the right, north and south. It was split along the 17th parallel, which was supposed to be a demilitarized area. The north was to remain communist, with Ho Chi Minh as their leader, and the south was to be capitalist, with Ngo Diem Diem as their leader. You'd think this was the end of the conflict, but this was just the beginning.